August 1944. Americans, English and French advanced towards Paris. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union marches unstoppably towards Berlin. In the waters of the Pacific, the United States recovers one island after another. But what appears to be good news is far from it for prisoners in Nazi concentration camps, also known as death camps. One of them, perhaps the most representative, has a sign at its entrance that reads, "Work makes one free." But there's nothing liberating about what happens inside. There, the inmates suffer not only hunger and mistreatment, but also humiliation, death, and daily living conditions that have been accurately described as hell on earth. But do you want to know which were the most terrifying concentration camps in Nazi Germany? Then join us in this new episode of Military History, in which we'll review the most terrible extermination sites of the Holocaust. Are you ready? Then prepare to travel back in time. From the moment that Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of the Third Reich in 1933, it was clear what would happen to Jews and other communities considered to be of inferior race, such as homosexuals, blacks, gypsies, and Slavic peoples, among many others. Their destination was the concentration camps. That is, the confinement and detention centers without any prior trial. And what happened later was worse. The so-called final solution began a systematic massacre dedicated to exterminating all those who the National Socialist government considered guilty of all its evils. To achieve this, several concentration camps were reconverted into extermination areas, or were created especially for this purpose. There were 6 of them, located in the annexed territories of Poland, and they began to stand out among the more than 40,000 camps built since 1933. We'll start with Auschwitz, which operated between May 1940 and January 1945, and received prisoners from all over Europe. The field was a network of 48 confinement areas. For its construction, the Poles and Jews living in the surrounding area were evicted. The Nazis demolished almost 1,000 houses and assigned other buildings to SS officers and NCOs. Birkenau, which would go down in history as Auschwitz II, was the site that in 1942 began the systematic extermination of its inmates. 90% of the dead were Jews, and the rest were Poles, Soviets, Romanians, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and Germans of mixed blood. While the cyanide-based pesticide Zyklon B was the leading cause of death, other major causes were overwork, malnutrition, dehumanized treatment, and disease. The camp managed to lock up 100,000 people, had gas chambers that killed 2,000 individuals at a time, and gassed and cremated 12,000 prisoners per day. Another chilling fact: 800 children were gassed on October 10, 1944, while 232,000 passed through Auschwitz during its entire existence. In this context, there were prisoners forced to collaborate in the genocide task themselves, until they were exhausted and exterminated. The slaughter ceased in late 1944, but by then, more than 1,100,000 people had lost their lives in a camp that contained around 8,200 SS men and 200 female guards. But was there any other place as terrible as this? The answer is yes, Treblinka too, which ran from July 1942 to October 1943. There, carbon monoxide chambers killed more than 900,000 prisoners. It only took a fictitious railway station and a camouflage path leading directly to the chambers, as well as 120 people in charge of the field, of whom only 30 were from the SS. That area was the final destination of the Jews of Warsaw and of Polish, Gypsy, and Jewish groups from other parts of Europe. Here, there was not only forced labor in a gravel quarry, but also a sector of labor education for non-Jewish Poles who, according to the Germans, had violated labor discipline. In addition, all members of the Auxiliary Guards Unit were trained at the Treblinka training ground, a special unit of the SS. German personnel and auxiliaries trained there periodically assassinated members of the Jewish worker detachments, the Sonderkommandos, whose replacements were on the next transports. Treblinka had a prisoner uprising towards the end of its active term, but barely 100 were able to escape. The rest were killed during the escape attempt or forced to dismantle the camp, with subsequent shootings that were similar to the executions carried out by Willy Mentz, an SS corporal who received the unsuspecting prisoners from the trains in an area with a Red Cross flag and shot them in an open pit. But why was Treblinka shut down in 1943? Simply because it had already accomplished its task. Poland's ghettos were already emptied and its Jews murdered. The same happened with Belzec, the third death camp that we must mention. Between March 1942 and June 1943, it annihilated more than 600,000 Jews in the gas chambers. The Belzec authorities rebuilt the chambers to wipe out almost all the newly arrived Jews. Only a group of prisoners were kept alive to be forced to rescue clothes and valuables, and also to perform maintenance on the incineration furnaces. In here, the genocide lasted for almost 10 months. Later, the pits were dug up to recover the bodies and burn them. As had happened in other areas, the Germans made plantations in order to hide what had happened. Chelmno, Sobibor, and Majdanek are three other names that abided by the final solution, with 320, 250, and 80,000 deaths respectively. In Chelmno, the Germans used trucks that suffocated their passengers with carbon monoxide. In Sobibor, the extermination occurred with up to 60 wagons of prisoners per day. And Majdanek was part of the largest massacre of the Holocaust, Operation Urtenfest, in which more than 43,000 Jews were killed, including 18,000 on the outskirts of the camp. In addition, most sources indicate that the Mauthausen concentration camp group had between 122 and 320,000 victims. Having said all of this, it is necessary to mention Dachau, the first Nazi concentration camp and a model for the rest. It practically became an extermination camp from 1940, being the administrator of 100 subcamps scattered throughout southern Germany and Austria. Experts estimate that about 250,000 people passed through its buildings, and that more than 35,000 people were annihilated. Many perished from brutal medical experiments. There was also malnutrition, suicides, and a typhus epidemic that caused 15,000 deaths, in addition to executions of Soviet prisoners of war and exterminations due to infractions of the established rules. The horror in these facilities was such that, according to testimonies from those present, when the Americans entered, they did not hesitate to shoot between 35 and 50 SS guards. Nor should we forget Buchenwald, home of Ilse Koch and Martin Sommer, better known as the Witch and the Executioner of Buchenwald. Both committed acts so sinister and depraved that they were even tried by the SS Justice in 1943. The executioner tortured his victims with various instruments, while the witch selected tattooed prisoners to kill them and use their skin in decorative objects. All this sounds even worse if we remember the phrase at the entrance to Auschwitz: "Work makes one free." Liberation here was nothing short of hellish annihilation. And now, coming to the end of this video, we'd like to ask you, what horrors of the concentration camps did you not know until today? And would you like us to talk about a specific concentration camp? Leave us your comment below. And don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you very much for joining us. And until the next video.